Cosnetic family.
Hey, thanks for joining the Cosnetic Podcast.
Cosnetic means being a person or thing that gives rise to a phenomenon that is dynamic or energizing.
We're tackling topics and telling the truth.
I'm Rodrigo Ross.
And I'm Keith Benson.
So today we are talking about, I didn't mean it like that.
Say what?
This whole idea of intent versus impact. Oh, I'm so excited.
Talk to me.
I'm excited. So, you know, as a society, right, especially within the last year, we've really been having some tough conversations about all of the different things that are going on in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And as a means of starting these conversations, or I think creating the spaces where people feel like they can really engage in these conversations, we put out this rhetoric that says, you know what, we're gonna give grace. We know you meant well. We're gonna measure what you say by your intent, which, okay, I think that's good. But as you grow and the conversations get deeper, I think we have to move from intent to impact. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and assume you meant well because for my own sanity, I'm going to have to assume that.
Right.
But I'm not going to give you a pass if the impact of what you said or what you did was hurtful. Right. And so that's this whole idea. Are we holding people accountable for the intent versus the impact?
And there's a lot that's been going on around that, right?
Mm-hmm,
and so that, in essence, the intent conversation, that is one about what they are.
Right.
Okay.
What a person is. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then we want to make sure that, because if someone is intended in their actions to be hurtful, and they can look at it in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
They could be, you call it the is, right?
Yeah.
The racist, the sexist, or the transphobic. Or, you pick either one. Either one. But inherently, that person is probably not one of those things right there.
Right. They didn't mean to be, right? Like, they didn't intend it. And many times if you say or you do or you're engaged in something, your intent wasn't, to hurt someone else or to be disrespectful or to ignore, a defining attribute about a person. But you did.
Right.
But you did, right? And for as much as we definitely want to give folks grace, we definitely want people to get their kudos for meaning well. You cannot give people a pass. Like, where's the growth, right? Where is the motivation for course correction? Because then you can always lean on this thing. Oh, well, I meant well. Did you really? Well, fix it then. Like, you hurt me, and then why am I, pacifying you, and you hurt me because I don't want you to feel some type of way, and I'm the hurt one. I'm the victim.
Right. I mean, you got to be able to see that through the lens because, what would you say? Perception is reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so my lens of perception is different from yours. And so you in some ways, you got to honor that.
Yeah.
And so that place of, what somebody is versus what they did, I mean, that's a whole balance in all of that. And so we got to be able to watch out for people's feelings. And especially in this day and time, with everything that is going on, there's enough information that is swirling around.
Yeah, you said something
for you to do your homework. And so the other day we were out doing a food distribution at the YMCA, and a man got out of the car and said, and it was me and a couple other ladies that were there, and one of the ladies had lifted the box. The box had a little weight to it, but that's what we do, right? We've been distributing boxes of food that probably weigh about 20 pounds, and we've been loading them in the cars. And so the man gets out of his car and says, "Oh, sorry, honey, you shouldn't be lifting that. You're a lady. Let me get that for you." But the trigger went off in my mind. I looked into the eyes of the ladies, and I was like, He said, that didn't settle well right there. Now, in his intentions, he was in the car with what I believe is his wife. Yeah. And I'm sure from his
being chivalrous.
Right.
Yeah.
And so sparked the conversation afterwards, talking to the ladies. I said, okay, let me talk about that. Okay. So, because I saw the look on y'all face,
you
right?
You unpacked that thing.
Yeah. So I said, now, how did you all feel about that? And then the one lady was like, I just let it roll off because he didn't know what he was saying. And then I said, well, let me play devil's advocate as a man. So where's the line between being a gentleman comes into play and what he said? And she said that, it really depends on on the lady because of the different situations that you go through.
Right.
Because a lot of men maybe use that in this passive way, like women, can't lift a 20-pound box or something. And women, we all know, are just the rock stars, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure you would agree to that, right?
I so agree with that.
Yeah, and so intent versus impact on that one right there. It was just pointed out, and I just, man, when I saw it, like, ding, 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 let me have this conversation.
That's an excellent example because I'm sure he intended well, but the reality is, for the women who experienced that, right, who were impacted by that, they have the right and the responsibility to say, hey, in this particular situation, I know you meant well, but this is how I took that. This is how I'm affected by that. This is how, and if the person really is well-meaning, right, if a person really does have the best interest of whoever they're talking to or engaging with, then they won't be that rubbed by that. They'll be like, oh, all right then, well, okay, thanks for letting me know. I mean, you might be a little embarrassed, right? And it may take you aback if you're not used to people kind of right in the moment course correcting you, but if you really had good intentions, then you would be way more open to learning when you cross the line. And
when you feel like you've crossed that line, this place of you got to do a few things. One, you got to listen, reflect on what was said, what was done.
Yeah.
And then apologize.
Oh, that part.
Especially if your intentions were not wrong, right? If your intentions weren't wrong,
right, then
hopefully you should be able to listen to what that other individual is saying.
Yeah.
And then just like give some thought, like play it back in your mind. Can you see it from that other person's lens?
Yeah.
And then when that place comes, hopefully that sincerity will come in there, that you apologize. And not just apologize just to be saying it, but truly mean that so that in the future you won't continue to repeat those actions.
Yeah, so there is this high Scientific American, which writes some amazing articles, right? They had this article talking about intent and impact, and they really summed it up really well. And they talked about it in that, throughout our society, for the most part, guiding lots of our actions, right, in society is this whole idea of a consequence approach, right? Okay. There are certain things that you do or you don't do in a society, right, in a governed society, in a ruled, in a civilized society, because you recognize that there will be consequences, right? And for the most part, if you ask someone, I would think that they would say, yeah, that's a simple, right? Like, I understand that. I get that. That's a simple and effective approach. However, right? So if you go on Yelp and you see that a restaurant got a bad review, what you do? You don't go to that restaurant, right? So if you were a doctor and you were doing a surgery a certain way and some data came out and say, hey, that's not the best way to do that, and we found out that it has consequences, as a doctor, you'd be like, oh, let me do the latest thing. You don't do that. But absolutely, that whole consequence-driven approach goes out the door when you start talking about the ists, like you were saying, right? Racism, sexism, all those kind of classism, all of that goes out the door. And now this whole idea of there being consequences to your actions or what you say or what you do, now that's just so abstract to people. Like, I'm really confused by that sometimes.
Yeah, now, so though you may have good intentions, you got to remember that you can't dictate how someone reacts to your response. I mean, you got to be willing, especially, let's put it in the workplace standpoint, right?
Right.
Like in the workplace, pretty neutral ground. We all should come with some level of lenses of things that, that go on and what we should and shouldn't say.
Yeah.
But if you're in the workplace and you want this culture that is open and honest and kind of transparent, you got to be able to be willing to take in the response that somebody gives back. If you we've all experienced some different comments in our workspace in such a way that, make you, yeah. do
I wish
that
they
right
could
there.
see your face right now.
But that individual who makes that statement is that, all right, your statement may have been hurtful.
Yes.
And like, you got to be ready to receive, what the response of that other individual is.
Yes, indeed. Because the idea is that the overall message in conversations that you're having, whether it's in the workplace or not, and someone says or does, or you're that someone that says or does something hurtful or offensive to another person, your intent or their intent, how does that trump the person who was victimized by what you said or what you did. Like, when did we twist that around that it is more important, right, for the person who intended and meant well for us to protect and insulate them than the person who was actually victimized? There is a book that puts this theory out that said that very frame, that very thinking is from a privileged standpoint, right? Like that underlying and embedded and structural privilege that people experience leads them to believe that it's more important to insulate me and protect my feelings than the person who was actually hurt by what I said or I did. Like, we're gonna just, never mind the victim.
Yeah, we all come from different backgrounds, and different experiences, so we gotta be able to at least understand that piece right there. I recall one time I was in a meeting and this supervisor referenced his full-time staff as the girls.
Wow.
And didn't nobody else say something. So I said, hold on. I said they're women and they're not girls.
Wow.
Then a pause went across the room, and if folks who know me, I always say put your voice in the room, because when you put your voice in the room, that just makes people think twice about that.
Yeah.
And then after I spoke up, one of the other ladies had said something in the room.
Yeah.
But that gentleman came back and, he said, Keith, I apologize. I did not mean it in that way at all.
Right.
And that you could really see that sincere apology in that. And I would tell you that I received that well. Yep. And it wasn't one that like, nah, you can't go.
Yeah.
I received it, and then you could just really tell that was sincere.
I would be interested to know if the ladies, right, that he worked with, how they experienced him after that, right? Did he stop? Because I don't know, did he say stuff like that, or did he use mannerisms or behaviors or whatever that supported that kind of thinking before and after you kind of brought it to his attention? I wonder if his behaviors changed.
Yeah, I don't know. But I will say I've talked to those women, and I've seen him and the interaction, and I would tell you that there's no change in that. I mean, no change in terms of any bad behavior on both parts. So
right.
I guess I would say still positive interaction with the individual.
Yeah, I mean, and that just goes to just kind of solidify this whole idea that, we understand as human beings that every action causes a reaction, right? Even if we meant well with the initial action, and if we really want to get to this reconciliation stage, whether it's we're reconciling the differences between genders, or we're reconciling some of the race and the systemic challenges that we have with race in this country, or if we're reconciling the differences between classism and classes and poverty and that kind of stuff, we have got to wrap our head around the fact that intent is good. You absolutely want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it does not exist in a vacuum. Like, there has to be some kind of measure or consequence for impacts. Let me tell you, the blood pressure medication Losartan, right?
Okay.
It was recalled because they recognized that the medicine in and of itself had this carcinogen that was contaminating it. Now, when the scientists first made that was not, they didn't want to put a carcinogen in the medicine. They didn't realize that when the things came together, it was going to react like that. And so they had to recall it. Same thing happened when, if you remember, when they built these new airplanes, and then those airplanes started crashing, and there were fatalities, right?
Right.
The first thing they did was snatch those airplanes off the market. And I'm sure that the manufacturer of the airplane did not intend to put out a product that was going to kill people, that planes that were going to crash. But they were absolutely held responsible for what happened because of those actions, because of those things. Now, if we can understand that and we can create policies and rules and rubrics,
right,
then why can't we seem to get past that when it comes to the sensitive stuff like racism and sexism and classism and transphobia and all that?
But I would say that some people sometimes they feel like they don't have any power in that situation. I think the power comes in your voice and questions also. Power. Yeah. I think power is in questions. So, a question could be that when somebody makes that statement to you versus you going in the parking lot and talking around the water cooler and talking to individuals about that. While you have the opportunity right there on the spot, just ask the clarifying question. So, I'm sorry, can you repeat that, or maybe give me more clarification on what you mean by that?
Yeah.
Because if you don't say anything, that individual will never learn. And again, another example that I had, I'm on the call with one of our vendors, and the vendor continued to reference the ladies who were on the cleaning crew as the girls that come in. And I could tell by his tone, that's just the way he talked.
Yeah.
And not referencing girls to me is under the age of 18.
Right.
And women are 18 and over.
Right.
Like for me, that's how I clarify that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I hear girls, I'm thinking teenager.
Right.
And clearly, these are grown women who take care of their families by the way of work. And so I paused them. I said, hey, for our conversation, please refer to them as women, because that's what they are. They're not girls. And I would tell you that don't know whether his speech changed outside of our conversation, but in our conversations, not just in that particular one, but those ongoing, it was women. Every once in a while, he'll slip up. Oh, I meant girls. Yeah. I mean, he would say I meant women.
Yeah.
And he would change. And so, like, you got to be able to put that, again, ask those questions, put some clarification out there, so people can help people change their output.
First of all, you better go ahead being a amplifier ally champion. You better go ahead. And you very rarely do we agree on stuff, but I'm gonna clap you up today.
Well, thank you.
Did all of that happen when you became an amplifier of the women's ERG? Did it breed in you this extra passion that is just so awesome right now?
No, I would say that it was there before, but I would definitely say it is definitely much more amplified, if you want to use that word too, right now, because being an amplifier for our women's ERG, sitting in on the conversations and them being vulnerable to open up with me present, definitely caused me to listen more, and from a totally different lens than my male lens, right?
Yeah.
And so that has been very helpful to hear the stories of the ladies that I work with.
Good job. You're welcome. You gonna tell me thank you for asking you to sit in that? Probably not. So
we're gonna continue with this.
Okay,
podcast.
So as I think about this intent and impacting, right, it shows up across so many different areas of your life, right? And so I'm just thinking, even with my children, right?
Okay.
The relationship that I have with each one of my kids is so very different, and the things that I do with them, I'm thinking I intended for this to happen, I intended for that to happen, but the impact is very different. So, like my baby girl, she gets motivated when I just get passionate and be like, okay, look, we're going to do this. You're going to stop doing this. This is the line. You have crossed the line. That's it, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't have that much of an impact. Like that gets her going. She's like, all right, now she mean business. Let me get about it. But my baby boy, if I get passionate and I'm intending to motivate him or tell him, okay, look, you're about to cross a line, or I'm drawing a line in the sand, that has a completely different impact on him. Like, we have to have restorative conversations, because my poor baby is broke down. He's like, my mother doesn't love me. She doesn't care. And I'm like, what? And so that's really how I understand this whole impact versus intent thing in a much different way. And that's put me on my learning edge too.
Right.
To be open when people tell me about, something that I did that I intended for it to come out a certain way, or I intended for it to happen or show up or cause something, but they experience that thing way different. And it helps me to realize that when one person felt it or was impacted that way, that one person was impacted that way, right? Because there are certain things that you can say and do to one person that it doesn't even register with them, whereas another person, that's a hurtful thing.
Yeah, and you got to recognize that when you're in these situations that you're in control, you get be in control of your own emotions and your reactions, because research shows that people who experience bias and discrimination, they have worse health outcomes in comparison to those who don't.
Absolutely.
I mean, right now, I would say personally, from what has been going on for this last year, we got the trial that's going on right now. That is definitely, I've had to check my emotions.
Yeah.
Because I know there was times over this last year, like there was movies like I couldn't bring myself to watch. It took me a minute. And so, and then when things happen, my response, is like, all right, check yourself, Keith, first and foremost, because you can't allow yourself to get to these stressful places, and that, that stuff builds up. And so, and sometimes it's a heavy load to, you quote unquote, you feel like you're teaching and coaching all the time around this intent versus, I know I'm sure you had good intentions.
Right.
But here's what the impact of that is. Let me help you to understand the ripple impact that this has caused right here. Because you hurt somebody in this situation, and then what it translates into other situations also.
Yeah, and sometimes I explained it to a coworker of mine one time, because they had an exchange with someone and they had said something, and the person just, like you said, they had an emotional response, and they really just kind of blew up at this person, and of course, they went with the I meant well, I didn't mean for it to this, that, and the other thing, and they were feeling a little bit attacked. The person that was talking to me was feeling a little bit attacked, and I told him, I said, you have to understand, even though you might have come to that person and said that thing well-intentioned that one time, you were the 20th person that stabbed that person, that individual that day, and they had just reached their breaking point. And so sometimes you have to understand, once again, while you're well-intentioned, who else, being well-intentioned, possibly, right, has said something or done something or crossed the line or done something harmful to someone that you're just adding on to and you're layering on. And if you don't take the time to just kind of understand how you're playing into that situation with that one person, don't make these assumptions across groups, right? Like, get to understand folks as individuals and what these things do to them and how they feel and how they're experiencing it. Then you'll just keep going through life with these glasses on, like, oh, but because I mean well, it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Like, you could have been a straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak.
Yeah, and because some people experience this in so many different ways, the intent of the impact of what comes across, like our ERG groups are really important in our workspaces. Yeah. And so you mentioned about the women's ERG. We have Hispanic Latino ERG, the African American ERG, the LGBTQ that we're about to start. All of those groups are good because you want to be able to find a support group. And so the support group does not look like the group that you talk to in the parking lot.
Well, that's the instigator group. Huh?
Right. Find a support group, a group that you trust, that you feel good about, that you guys can have transparency of conversation in there, so that you can help eliminate some of these things that goes on within our workplace, because we all need that. Or I know we have a support group that we have just outside of the official group of ERG. It's a network of colleagues that we have a text group that goes on just so that we can have conversations, real transparent conversation. It's not to hate on anybody, but it's like, hey, this is what I experienced. Hey guys, what's going on with you in this space? Hey, I just needed to vent about this right here. Yeah. And what I find is that when I drop that in there about the impact of something that has happened to me, I got a group of colleagues that are supporting me, like, here's how you can handle this.
Yeah. And even in that group, sometimes we have some intent versus impact. Like, I think you intended to be funny when you was talking about Prince, but you almost got kicked out the group. You can't talk about Prince. The impact.
Yeah, the impact was deep on that one. I felt the backlash.
Prince.
Yeah, and I didn't know the supporters of Prince.
Intent versus impact.
Yeah.
God rest his soul. You almost got put out behind that very same thing.
Well, your intent versus your impact. Think about that always as things that are coming out of your mouth. Thank you guys for listening to Cosmetic.
Well, we're tackling topics and telling the truth.
Hey, subscribe and listen to us each week.
And don't be shy. Give us a review and tell us what you think about intent and impact.
And as always,
Be dynamic.
be phenomenal.
Be cosmetic.